Briefing by Foreign Ministry Spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, Moscow, July 18, 2024. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's participation in ASEAN, EAS, and ARF meetings. On July 26 to 27, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will be in Vientiane for the regular ministerial meetings of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, held in different formats, including Russia-ASEAN, the East Asia Summit, EAS, and the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF. Once again, the events will be held in Vientiane, Laos. I hope there will be no confusion about the site. The events will be held in Laos. ASEAN is a core element of multilateral interstate processes in the vast Asia-Pacific region. We regard it as a key partner in the context of implementing the initiative of President Putin on creating a new architecture of Eurasian security. The task is to align the cooperation resources of individual countries and multilateral instruments to find an algorithm of joint peaceful development on the continent that will be comfortable to all participants. During these meetings, we will present our views on the regional situation, in particular, the growth of the conflict potential in Asia-Pacific due to the Western policy of militarizing the region, NATO military potential buildup, and the expansion of the network of bloc mechanisms. We will continue to advocate the idea of creating a just and equal world order where ASEAN is a natural partner for the SCO and the EAEU. These three organizations are working in a common system of coordinates for positive cooperation and stronger interaction in various spheres. This year, we will mark the 20th anniversary of Russia's accession to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, TAC, also known as the Bali Treaty, 1976. In this context, it is planned to reaffirm its principles of peace and regional stability in Vientiane. We hope to use the Russia-ASEAN ministerial meetings for holding a substantive dialogue on the entire range of cooperation with ASEAN in politics, security, trade, the economy, social and cultural spheres. We plan to discuss the implementation of the 2021 to 2025 Comprehensive Plan of Action to implement the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the Russian Federation's strategic partnership and launch preparations of a new document of this kind for the medium term. The focus will be on the development of high-tech and science-intensive sectors, smart cities, and cooperation in digitalization and power generation. The EAS agenda will highlight preparations for a summit meeting in Vientiane in October 2024 and a review of the organization's roadmap adopted last year for 2024 to 2028. We will speak about stimulating the implementation of the projects added to the EAS format at Russia's initiative to create a regional pandemic response mechanism, promote cooperation in tourism, and develop ties between volunteer organizations in the Asia-Pacific region. We hope to approve a program for next year at the ARF Forum and to adopt a themed statement on ferry safety and several working plans, including on emergency response. We will use ASEAN support to promote practical initiatives on international information security, which is among Russia's priorities on this platform. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's participation in opening an exhibition on the 80th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Russia and Syria. On July 19, an exhibition on Russian-Syrian relations will open in the Ministry's building on Smolenskaya Square. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will unveil the exhibition and is expected to deliver remarks. We invite everyone to this ceremony, which will be streamed in the Foreign Ministry's social media accounts. Ukraine crisis update. The Kiev regime, now in functional obsolescence, has focused on terrorist attacks on peaceful Russian cities and villages, taking out the impotent anger over its own battlefield failures on the civilian population. The weapons supplied by the collective West are being widely used against innocent people, which makes Western countries complicit in these monstrous atrocities, the terrorist attacks committed by Vladimir Zelensky's gang. Unfortunately, children are often the ultimate victims of these attacks. On July 11, those followers of Bandera dropped an explosive device from a drone in Shebekino, Belgorod region, right where 5 children were playing outside. All of them were injured with varying severity. There is no doubt that it was a deliberate and premeditated terrorist attack. On the same day, Shebekino and several nearby communities were also shelled by the armed forces of Ukraine. 22 people were injured, and a lot of damage was done to residential buildings and civilian infrastructure. On July 13, 8 residents were injured in another attack on Shebekino. On the same day, Ukrainian Nazis dropped an explosive object from a drone in Gorlovka, injuring 3 civilians, including a 12-year-old child. On July 14, militants of the Armed Forces of Ukraine used a multiple-launch rocket system to attack Oktyabrskyi, a village in the Belgorod region. 4 people were injured, including a 9-month-old child. On July 15, another strike on the village of Nikolskoye, DPR, resulted in 1 civilian death. Yesterday, on July 17, a Ukrainian FPV drone attacked a car near the village of Tsarkovny, Belgorod region, driven by a young couple. Both spouses died at the scene. All these crimes are the work of the Kiev regime gang, junta, clique, call it what you want. It is the terrorist rabble that has dug in on Bankovaya, and is being sustained primarily with the US and British money, let alone huge financial injections from the European Union. Russian law enforcement agencies record every crime. All those involved will definitely be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Courts in Russia continue to convict Ukrainian neo-Nazis for serious crimes, for terrorist attacks against civilians, relying on the evidence provided by the Investigative Committee of Russia. The Investigative Committee has brought charges in absentia against ex-commander of the Ukraine Air Force Sergei Drozdov, former commander of Special Operations Forces Igor Lunyov, and ex-commander of the Missile Forces and Artillery, deputy commander of the ground troops of the Armed Forces of Ukraine Vyacheslav Gorbylev. At various times between 2015 and 2021, these individuals led the Combined Forces operation in southeastern Ukraine. As a result of their criminal actions, at least 177 people, including 8 children, were killed and injured, and more than 190 infrastructure facilities in the DPR and the LPR were damaged. Measures are being taken to track them down and take them in custody. Foreign mercenaries fighting on the side of the Kiev regime also get what they deserve. According to the Investigative Committee of Russia, 714 foreigners have been indicted on these counts. Of this number, 422 are on the international wanted list. Arsen Dmytryk, a militant from the Azov Nationalist Battalion, was sentenced to life in absentia. In March 2022, he ordered his subordinates to shell residential buildings and civilian infrastructure facilities in the Vostochny residential area of Mariupol. 2 people were killed as a result. An international arrest warrant has been issued for him. Ukrainian neo-Nazi Viktor Pietka was sentenced to 25 years in absentia. In March 2022, he ordered a sniper from the Armed Forces of Ukraine to kill a civilian in Mariupol. Viktor Pietka is also on the international wanted list. The case of the perpetrator of this criminal order is considered in court. I repeat, these are just some examples of multiple proceedings by investigative authorities, law enforcement agencies and courts with regard to crimes of the Kiev regime. This work will continue. We have noted revelations by Kirill Budanov, head of the main intelligence directorate at the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. On July 13, 2024, he admitted in an interview with Ukraine's NV media outlet that futile attempts had been made to assassinate President of Russia Vladimir Putin. Doubtless, the Kiev regime's Anglo-Saxon masters were directly involved in planning and financing these crimes. Tremendous funding is coming in. During this period, Western countries have never condemned any single evil deed, any terrorist attack against the civilian population and representatives of various state power branches. They have never done this at the national level, collectively or publicly, or within the framework of any active work at international platforms. US, British, French and German representatives never voiced any critical remarks. The collective West is financing the Kiev regime on a grand scale and endlessly supplying it with weapons. Consequently, they are becoming accomplices to the Kiev regime's criminal activities. Although this horrendous and never-ending rain of money and weapons is coming to Bankovaya Street, Vladimir Zelensky's junta is unable to achieve the desired result. According to Kirill Budanov, the armed forces of Ukraine are facing problems that tend to become aggravated. This will continue to happen in the future. Speaking frankly and without symbolism, the armed forces of Ukraine are suffering one setback after another, and they are heading towards inevitable defeat? The West, that is trying hard to prevent the Russian victory, is worried about this. They resort to terror when there are no other options left. We are talking about this regularly. As we understand, the Kiev regime is accustomed to terrorist methods. It has already accumulated tremendous experience of perpetrating terrorist attacks. On July 16, 2024, the deadline for mandatory updates to military data for those liable for service in Ukraine, as mandated by the controversial mobilization law, expired. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, around 4.7 million people complied with this requirement. Of those, 75,000 were abroad, representing roughly 1 in 10 Ukrainians of mobilization age. The leading countries with Ukrainian refugees participating in this update were Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Canada. As of April, over 800,000 Ukrainian citizens were registered in EU countries. Plans to mobilize around 300,000 people have fallen significantly short of targets. Many Ukrainian citizens prefer to go into hiding or even serve prison terms rather than be sent to the front lines. This is a notable trend. The number of draft dodgers in Ukraine has nearly tripled compared to 2022, now reaching 417,000. Most of them are in western Ukraine, with the Lvov region leading significantly. In 2023 and the first half of 2024, 85,800 men from the Lvov region were put on the wanted list for evading military conscription. In Lvov, there is an extensive network of Telegram channels with around 150,000 subscribers, roughly 1/5 of the city's population, that inform residents in advance about upcoming mobilization raids. Is this what Ukrainian democracy looks like? Is this the young Ukrainian state that the West praised for being on the right track, sovereign, independent, and nationally oriented? The number of criminal cases related to desertion and unauthorist abandonment of military units is also on the rise. In the first half of 2024 alone, nearly 30,000 such cases were opened in Ukraine. Since 2022, Ukrainian law enforcement agencies have opened a total of 63,200 such criminal proceedings. According to German media, including Deutsche Welle, the actual numbers could be 3 to 4 times higher. Reports on Ukrainian social networks indicate that men aged 20 to 25 are being mobilized, though this was not being specified in the stringent mobilization law adopted in April. There is increasing talk about lowering the mobilization age to 18 in 2025. Whenever such plans are discussed, officials on Bankovaya Street deny them, offering reassurances and promises. Yet, contrary to their assurances, the opposite tends to happen. There is no doubt that the mobilization age will be lowered this time as well, to 18 years. And I think this is not the limit. The situation was further aggravated by the former U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO, Ivo Daalder, who, on July 14, stated in an interview with Euronews that Kiev should utilize its existing human resources by recruiting citizens aged 18 to 20 into the troops. It's important to note who made this statement: the U.S. representative to NATO, an organization involved in developing aggressive anti-Russia strategies and using the Kiev regime for these purposes. Who else but the American permanent representative would understand, know, and clearly foresee that Washington will pressure the Kiev regime to implement its plans? Neither are we surprised at the plans of Zelensky's regime to strengthen control of the location and movement of people aged 16 to 60 years. Overall, the money people spend to leave Ukraine have long exceeded the €6 billion stipulated in the West for the extra budgetary project on preventing and responding to trafficking in human beings amid the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. According to Ukrainian law enforcement agencies, at least 200 people try to illegally cross the border. It is impossible to do this legally, every day, which adds up to 6,000 a month. Unofficial estimates put the figure at about 20,000. This is evidence of total chaos in Ukraine, the absence of any legality and legitimacy in the Ukrainian authorities' activities, and the Ukrainian citizens' lack of faith in a bright future Zelensky and the West promised, which can only be paid for with the lives of Ukrainians. This is the current situation in Ukraine. I believe the West should abandon scruples and admit that what is happening in Ukraine is liberal democracy, so that those who will be offered, promised, or forced to adopt it know what lies in store for them. Returning to the subject of mobilization in Ukraine, I would like to tell you about an interesting trend for recruiting Ukrainians with dual citizenship. The Ukrainian army is so badly short of personnel that the government is thinking of mobilizing Ukrainians with foreign passports or residence permits. I am not going to find any logic in the actions of the Ukrainian authorities who did not allow their citizens to hold Russian passports despite family relations and a common history. They were forced to make a choice, either a Ukrainian passport or a Russian citizenship. But there is no logical or legal explanation for what is happening now, considering that there are Ukrainians with foreign, including Western, passports. This doesn't seem to embarrass anyone in Ukraine. It is legal mayhem. Kiev is in talks, so far unsuccessfully, with several European countries, namely Poland, the Baltics, and Scandinavian countries, on luring Ukrainians out of these countries. The EU is talking more and more often that they should not only send weapons to Ukraine but also help it with military personnel. It has not yet come to the mass deportation of Ukrainians from Western Europe, but refugees are being insistently invited to join various volunteer units that will be sent to Ukraine. Moreover, EU countries have started talking about the shortage of funds for giving aid, allowances, and other benefits to Ukrainian refugees. This is being done to force them to go back to Ukraine and into the hands of military recruitment offices, who will send them to their deaths via the battlefield. On July 11, Minister-President of Bavaria Markus Söder shared in an interview with Münchner Merkur that the regional authorities may send Ukrainian men of call-up age back home, if Ukraine so requests. Those unwilling to face reality are the only ones who cannot understand or hear this. This is reality. It is not a secret that German special services have long been encouraging refugees to join the German Volunteer Corps as part of the International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine. They are enticed to do so by the prospect of fast-tracking their German citizenship, but only after the hostilities end. Whoever will survive may be granted German citizenship. I can say right away that Westerners issued millions and tens of millions of such promises. If you want to know how it ends, look at what happened in Afghanistan. They did not let even their own citizens, recruited helpers, people who had faith in the United States and worked for Washington in Afghanistan, board outbound flights. The people clung to the landing gear and fell to their death when planes were up in the air. It happens every time. On the other hand, you need to know history in order not to repeat mistakes. When history is cancelled, mistakes tend to be repeated. The agreement on security cooperation signed by Zelensky on July 8 with Warsaw should be viewed from the same angle. Among other things, it says that citizens of Ukraine temporarily residing in Poland and other countries can take part in the training of the Ukrainian security and defense forces personnel to be conducted in Lublin, Poland, where the Lithuanian-Polish-Ukrainian Brigade established in 2014 is stationed. The Ukrainian Legion will be formed on the basis of this brigade. On July 11, Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski said several thousand applications to join the Legion had allegedly been submitted. Warsaw makes no secret of the fact that it plans to encourage Ukrainian citizens to return home to serve in the Ukrainian armed forces. In fact, they encourage them to part with their lives of their own accord rather than serve in the Ukrainian forces. Notably, in early July, the Polish authorities cut benefits to Ukrainian refugees and tightened the procedure for entering the country. This liberal democracy has an iron fist in a velvet glove. The Baltic states are similarly inclined. On July 15, the Lithuanian authorities announced that they plan to stop providing tuition-free education for Ukrainian students at their universities at the request of Ukraine. How do you like these vicissitudes of liberalism? There is every reason to believe that soon enough the West's plan to fight to the last Ukrainian will include deportations of Ukrainian refugees to the front. July 11 marks 81st anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the peak of the tragic events known as the Volyn massacre. On that day in 1943, UNUPA thugs attacked about 100 Polish villages, brutally killing about 8,000 civilians, mostly women, children, and the elderly. The archives declassified by the Russian Federal Security Service 2 years ago show that in 1943 to 1945 Ukrainian Nazi minions killed several tens of thousands of Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians, and people of other ethnicities who lived in Volyn, Polsy, Galicia and other regions of western Ukraine, Belarus, and eastern Poland. Poles refer to the Volyn massacre as genocide. However, intoxicated by the fumes of Russophobia, they are nonetheless helping the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, which openly glorifies Stepan Bandera and other Hitler's henchmen. What is the logic behind that? Or, is it that anything that is directed against Russia is good for the West? The notorious double standards and cynical calculus blatantly underlie this approach. This is corroborated by the above July 8 Polish-Ukrainian Agreement on Security Cooperation. Its fifth section stipulates the importance of achieving reconciliation on disputed issues, which stem from the historical complexities of both countries. Among other things, the issue is about developing joint historical research tools, as well as curricula instructions for school textbooks covering the history of relations between the two countries and peoples, in particular the Ukrainian-Polish Brotherhood in the War of 1920 against Bolshevik Russia, meaning that there were no Bolsheviks, Communists, or the Communist Party in Ukraine back then. There were no Ukrainians in the central Bolshevik bodies, or educational party bodies. There was nothing. On the other hand, they've written quite a lot recently on the subject of history. It is unlikely that Poland would agree to turn a blind eye to the Volyn tragedy, or Kiev would come to terms with Warsaw and recognize the atrocities committed by the Banderites as genocide of Poles. At some point, Russia and Poland set up a commission like that. The difference is that from our perspective, reconciliation of parties, countries, nations, states, or peoples does not imply rewriting history. We believe it means being knowledgeable about history in order to avoid repeating mistakes. What we are witnessing now as we look at what the Polish-Ukrainian Historical Commission is doing speaks to the contrary. It says that the focus is on rewriting and distorting history, which will lead, as I mentioned earlier, to a repetition of bloody mistakes. Ukraine is counting, this is laid out in the above agreement, on Poland helping it boost its economy, especially the defense industry, in order to achieve the notorious goal of retaking control over the country's territory within the 1991 borders. In return, Poles will be accorded free access to the Ukrainian market, trade privileges, and other preferences. Warsaw is unabashedly taking advantage of the Kiev regime's situation and making plans to use the first available opportunity to take back its historical lands, which, from the point of view of many people in Warsaw, ended up as part of Ukraine purely by accident. It is also clear that, signing such agreements with Western countries, the Zelensky regime is chasing fleeting advantages in order to save itself and stay in power. Clearly, Bankovaya will stop at nothing to achieve this goal. Zelensky does not care about Ukraine or the future of the Ukrainian people. I have a question: what does Zelensky hate Ukrainians so much for? The above facts once again confirm the urgency of the goals of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and to eliminate the threats emanating from its territory. All of them, as the Russian leadership has repeatedly stated, will be fulfilled no matter what. Developments in Moldova. As the presidential elections in October 2024 approach, President Maia Sandu's regime is increasingly relying on anti-Russia rhetoric as its main, and essentially only, campaign slogan. On July 10, President Sandu claimed that the Kremlin's desire to return thieves to power poses a threat to Moldova. Simply put, she fabricated another unfounded accusation. She targets the opposition and the citizens of her own country who, despite facing threats and repression from Sandu's regime, call things as they are and strive to preserve Moldova's history, culture, and ethnic identity. These people are now being openly disparaged. Meanwhile, official Chisinau continues its policy of erasing all connections to Russia from the public consciousness, particularly targeting the Russian language. They have already eradicated the Moldovan language, asserting that only Romanian exists. This ongoing struggle, marked by a clear nationalist bias, now also targets the Russian language. In June, it was announced that 3 gymnasiums and 2 primary schools offering Russian language instruction would be closed in the Sinjare district, citing a low number of students and teachers as the reason. According to open sources, there are currently 1,218 schools operating in the country, with only 202 providing instruction in Russian. This is despite the fact that about 80% of Moldova's residents speak and regularly use Russian. Last week, Moldovan media reported that the activities of the Slavic University would be suspended starting July 22 due to the Moldovan Ministry of Education's refusal to grant accreditation for its bachelor's and master's programs. This development is not surprising, as it reflects the systemic policy of Maia Sandu. It is worth noting that Sandu grew up in the prosperous Soviet Moldavia, but now she identifies herself as a Romanian and is actively working to transform Moldova into Romania. For instance, every assertion requires evidence, and we certainly have it. During Maia Sandu's tenure as Minister of Education from 2012 to 2015, 119 schools were closed in Moldova, and the total number of educational institutions decreased by 221. To achieve the goal of erasing the Moldovan language, culture, and identity, and turning the country into a part of Romania, the educational level of the population needs to be lowered. This is precisely what she is doing. Pro-government activists are calling to rename key parts of the Moldovan capital's urban infrastructure, including Moscow Avenue and St. Petersburg Square. This is not surprising, as any reminders of Russia's significant historical role in preserving Moldova's national identity pose a challenge to Maia Sandu and are a thorn in the side of those advocating the demoldovization of the country. Under the guise of combating the fabricated Russian threat, Maia Sandu's repressions against those advocating constructive relations with Russia are intensifying. Opposition presidential candidates are branded as Kremlin agents and promoters of Russian interests. Additionally, Anca Dragou, the Romanian ex-official appointed by Sandu as head of the central bank, has declared the use of Russian Mir cards in Moldova illegal, claiming that transactions made through these cards pose a threat to national security. From the perspective of the Maia Sandu regime, diminishing both the educational standards and financial well-being of Moldova's citizens is a key objective. At the same time, under the guise of European integration, Maia Sandu's regime is intensifying the militarization of the country. On July 15, the Moldovan Ministry of Defense announced the imminent arrival of a new shipment of military equipment from the United States. It's only logical since it has nothing to do with the opening of schools or enhancing the well-being of Moldovan citizens. Instead, it signals a push towards adopting a Ukrainian scenario. The shipment includes 20 Humvee armored vehicles. The updated draft National Defense Strategy of Moldova for 2024 to 2034 outlines plans to integrate the country into the European Union's security and defense framework by 70% by 2029 and fully by 2034. Russia's actions are characterized as posing a direct threat to Moldova's security and constitutional order. Independent Moldovan experts predict that it won't be long before the authorities, acting against the wish of the Moldovan people and under pressure from Washington and Brussels, officially abandon the country's constitutional neutrality. Yet, ordinary Moldovans are unwilling to accept being mere pawns in the West's geopolitical maneuvers. Recent public opinion polls reveal that 53% of respondents lack trust in Maia Sandu, and 57% disapprove of the pro-Western government's actions over the past 3 years. For more than half of those surveyed, Russia remains one of Moldova's key political and economic partners. These numbers are from Moldovan sources. For us, Moldova and its people are friends, and we are committed to maintaining and enhancing an equal, mutually beneficial, and time-tested dialogue with them. Attempts to erase Russia from Moldova's past, present, and future are bound to fail. Switzerland-NATO agreement on opening NATO's liaison office in Geneva. On July 15, Switzerland and NATO signed an agreement that governs such matters as the legal status of the alliance's new liaison office in Geneva. It will open before the year is out. According to a press release by the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, NATO is opening a multilateral liaison office in Geneva to engage with the international and non-governmental organizations based there. Do you know how far Brussels is from Geneva? Even assuming that most Western politicians were clearly not top of their geography class, well, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said countries were hundreds of thousands of kilometers apart. But Brussels and Geneva are a little closer than that, I would say. In fact, the distance between them is quite short. It's a pleasant car ride. What is it that NATO plans to do in Geneva for establishing contacts with Geneva-based organizations? As a reminder, Brussels is home to the North Atlantic Alliance headquarters, that requires an international agreement on this matter. What are they really doing? Without a doubt, this step is further evidence of Switzerland's widening departure from its neutral status, which previously enabled the country to provide a platform for impartial dialogue and discussions on the most pressing international issues without any external interference or pressure. We have repeatedly commented on Bern's moves that run counter to neutrality, which have become systematic lately. I suggest we review those acts and highlight the most egregious ones now. Switzerland joined all the EU's anti-Russia sanctions packages and the group advocating for an international tribunal against Russia's top officials. Switzerland supported the freezing of Russian assets. Its approved foreign policy strategy for 2024 to 2027 excluded Russia from the European security system. The country is increasingly engaging with NATO, and finally, has granted a Geneva platform to the alliance, which is in fact an aggressive military political organization with a bloc-based confrontation philosophy. Switzerland's unfriendly policy towards our country culminated in hosting the Peace Conference on Ukraine on June 15 to 16, 2024, granting the Kiev regime's requests. Although a failed initiative, it was still important as a manifestation of Bern's true approach. Its policies actually amount to renouncing its neutral status. All these hostile acts by the Swiss side perfectly align with the anti-Russia solidarity of the collective West. I would like to note that we are not going to look the other way, and will continue to take these moves into account while planning cooperation with Switzerland, both on a bilateral basis and in multilateral formats. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov mentioned this at the July 16 meeting with Ignazio Casas, held at the request of the Swiss Foreign Minister. We strongly believe that Switzerland has by now provided sufficient evidence and proof of its inadequacy as an honest broker in conflict resolution, a role it is trying to play with exaggerated zeal in the international arena. German government's plans to reimburse Polish victims of Nazi occupation during World War II. On July 2, 2024, during his visit to Poland, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the German government plans to reimburse Polish victims of Nazi occupation during World War II in recognition of Berlin's historical responsibility. They seem to be doing the right thing, and they remember history. There are plans to allocate about €200 million on individual payments. There are about 40,000 potential benefit seekers, including slave laborers, concentration camp inmates, representatives of the Jewish and Roma people. Wait a minute. Is this all? Only Poland and Jewish and Roma people? What about the rest? We perceive this step by the German side as yet another manifestation of criminal hypocrisy and double standards regarding historical responsibility. The leadership of Germany continues to divide victims of Nazi crimes into various categories, cynically singling out less worthy and more worthy nationals. We would like to recall that Berlin stubbornly refuses to recognize the siege of Leningrad and other Nazi crimes on the territory of the Soviet Union as genocide of Soviet nations. For a long time, Berlin has been making humanitarian payments only to Jewish nationals who had survived the siege of Leningrad, while ignoring our demands that such payments cover all siege survivors. What is this? Just imagine that people lived in a shared flat in besieged Leningrad. A Russian family occupied one room, and the second room belonged to a Jewish family. Members of another nationality, part of the multi-ethnic Soviet Union, lived in the third room. They could have been ethnic Germans, Poles, representatives of other fraternal republics, including Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Moldavia, and Ukraine. How should they divide this shared flat? Should it be divided along ethnic lines? One should read diaries, memoirs, and documents based on the testimony of besieged Leningrad's residents only once in order to understand that starvation did not discern between nationalities at that time. People survived while helping each other. They died from starvation, as a result of Nazi Germany's actions, rather than along ethnic lines. For decades, Berlin has been hypocritically remitting payments for individuals who had served with Waffen-SS units during World War II, including those directly involved in the siege of Leningrad. Is this normal? It appears that, in Berlin's opinion, Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian and other nationals who had survived the siege of Leningrad are not eligible for such payments. At the same time, German citizens who had besieged the city receive social benefits. However, ethnic Germans who lived in besieged Leningrad cannot count on these benefits either. This is a crime in the direct sense of the word and a repetition of the Third Reich's monstrous mistakes, rather than mere absurdity, foolishness, or deranged logic. We resolutely condemn this immoral position of German authorities. We are urging Berlin to stop this inhuman discrimination of persons impacted by the Nazi regime. On the other hand, Berlin is not alone in this approach towards segregating people. UK Special Forces War Crimes in Afghanistan. We have taken note of another journalistic investigation into the UK Special Forces War Crimes in Afghanistan published in The Times. It is based on witness accounts by people in the Helmand province about developments in the British zone of responsibility during the NATO occupation. The Afghans these journalists talked with spoke about numerous cases of summary executions of civilians by members of the British Special Air Service, SAS. They often did it for fun and even held killing contests to see who would kill more. When conducting anti-rebel operations, the British military often manufactured false evidence by placing weapons on the dead bodies. Torture, including electric shocks, was used to make civilians suspected of ties with the Afghan armed resistance. If you don't remember, British and American troops were deployed in the sovereign state of Afghanistan as part of the NATO force or individually in accordance with a UN Security Council resolution. Great Britain and the United States have not a single time accounted for their activities to the Security Council over the past decades. They used their mandate on many occasions but have not accounted for their activities. Moreover, the Afghan victims' cases were dealt with by the UK military who have not transferred them to the Afghan prosecution or courts. It is thanks to reporters that the issue of British war crimes in Afghanistan remains in the focus of public attention. We believe that Keir Starmer, the current head of the Labour government who often expressed his commitment to the human rights issue, including war crimes carried out abroad, has a chance to show, or more precisely prove that he practices what he preaches. We again call on London and its NATO allies to stop protecting war criminals and to conduct an honest investigation, if they are up to the task. We call for an immediate resumption of an impartial investigation that should be crowned with the punishment of all those who are guilty of crimes in Afghanistan. Publication of Japan's Annual Defense White Paper. We have taken note of the publication of the Annual Defense of Japan White Paper. Regrettably, it repeats allegations regarding Russia in the context of the Ukrainian crisis and the development of Russia's relations with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as well as unsubstantiated accusations, in particular, of violating UN Security Council decisions. Not surprisingly, Japan castigated Russia for its actions in Ukraine and somehow managed to link them to the deteriorating situation in Asia. We believe that it is necessary to say the following. If anything, it is Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's policy of remilitarizing Japan that is having a negative effect on security in Asia-Pacific. Japan should know that continued disregard for the peace provisions of its own constitution can not only increase tensions in the region but also contradicts the precepts of the UN Charter, in particular, Article 107 on the legitimacy of the Allied powers' actions towards Japan taken as a result of World War II. One such action was the approval of Japan's constitution by the Allied Council for Japan. We again call on Tokyo to recognize the results of the post-war settlement in their entirety and to offer sincere apologies to the neighboring nations that suffered from the Japanese aggression in 1930 to 1940. Canceling the rehabilitation of Japanese war criminals. We wish to update you on recent developments regarding Japanese militarism crimes during World War II, which, as we have consistently stated, remain subject to prosecution without a statute of limitations. Efforts are ongoing to ensure accountability for all those responsible. The Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation has officially announced that in its May-June 2024 resolutions, it has rescinded earlier decisions exonerating Japanese citizens S. Kikuchi, F. Kikuchi, I. Marufuji, K. Sato, and T. Soga. These individuals were involved in sabotage and espionage activities against the Soviet Union during the war. Following a review of the matter by cassation and supervisory courts, it has been established that these persons are not subject to exoneration, and that their guilt has been proved completely. Situation involving Zlatomir Dioflansky, member of the Russophiles Bulgarian National Movement. On July 8, Zlatomir Dioflansky, chairman of the Plovdiv branch of the Russophiles National Movement, was arrested in Bulgaria. We have received numerous requests for information about this case and have compiled the main questions into a comprehensive response. Dioflansky was detained on suspicion of inciting the disclosure of state secrets. Later, he has been released on bail and recognizance not to leave. If the court finds him guilty, he will face a lengthy prison sentence. It is unclear what Bulgarian secrets Zlatomir Dioflansky, who holds a relatively minor position in municipal government, could have possibly revealed. This situation appears more like an attempt to stifle dissent and silence those who oppose Sofia's Russophobic stance and support friendly relations with Russia. The Bulgarian authorities have a history of targeting individuals who openly express their love for Russia and its people. There have already been unfounded espionage charges leveled against activists of the Russophiles National Movement. Such actions by the Bulgarian authorities, who profess to uphold democratic values, represent a serious disregard for fundamental human rights and freedoms, including freedom of expression. We are deeply concerned about the growing pressure on the Russophile movement in Bulgaria. Representatives of this movement are speaking out and defending their rights against these injustices. We urge the Bulgarian authorities to adhere to the rule of law and to cease persecuting their citizens based on false and unfounded accusations. Czech Republic's new discriminatory requirements for Russian foreign travel passports. We view the Czech authorities' unilateral decision to reject Russian passports for traveling abroad without biometric chips as a further unfriendly action intended to damage bilateral relations and complicate the stay of Russian citizens, including those working in our diplomatic mission, in the country. At the same time, Prague is well aware that the earlier imposition of a numerical cap on the Russian embassy and the closure of 2 consulates general have severely limited our capacity to provide consular services, including the processing of new generation passports, for Russians in the Czech Republic. The public justifications for this decision, allegedly to prevent passport falsification and ensure Czech security, are frankly absurd and lack any substantive basis. Prague has once again shown its commitment to leading the Russophobic agenda of the collective West. The Czech authorities bear full responsibility for the further deterioration of relations and the difficulties faced by Russians as a result. Currently, the sole exception to the restrictive measures imposed by the Czech authorities, of which they have explicitly informed the Russian embassy in Prague, is for holders of non-biometric passports who are under 15 years old. Politicizing the activities of the Bretton Woods organizations. This July marks the 80th anniversary of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, widely known as the Bretton Woods Conference, which laid the groundwork for international regulation of the financial sphere and determined its post-war development. The conference led to the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. According to the statutory documents, the fund was supposed to help stabilize the global financial sphere and the balanced growth of trade, as well as the exchange rates and the balance of payments equilibrium. The bank was allegedly established to facilitate the economic recovery of the countries impacted by World War II. Let's look at where things stand in reality. In fact, the Bretton Woods system served the political and economic interests of the West, primarily the United States, and ensured domination of the US dollar, which served as the basis of currency parities and exchange rates, the predominant international legal tender and reserve currency. That would be just fine had the United States not weaponized the dollar to use it for destructive rather than creative purposes. There have always been complaints about the Bretton Woods institutions. As a rule, the fund and the bank put forward unacceptable, including politicized, terms and conditions for the borrowers. The assistance provided by these organizations has never been altruistic or impartial, and was clearly politicized. The most recent developments can only be described as follows: the Bretton Woods system has become exclusively a conduit for the political and economic interests of key Western shareholders who use it to consolidate the neo-colonial practices and to maintain their hegemony in international affairs and global markets. Above all, the Bretton Woods institutions are literally being used by the collective West as tools and instruments to oppose Russia. We regularly witness decisions by the fund or the bank to block or to refuse to allocate funds to the countries in need of support for technical reasons, due to outstanding debt or arrears, or under explicitly articulated political pretexts, such as unstable political situation, lack of legitimate authority, etc. I wonder if, according to the Bretton Woods institutions, the situation in the United States is politically stable. How do the Bretton Woods institutions assess the legitimacy of the authorities in Ukraine? Belarus, Venezuela, Iran, and Syria have faced such instances. They failed to receive even emergency funding during the coronavirus pandemic, even though they asked for it and backed up their requests with facts, figures, and the actual state of affairs. In the case of Damascus, the Syrians were denied help even after the devastating earthquake in 2023. Since October 2022, contrary to the IMF statutes, Washington has been blocking the provision of US dollars to Russia and Belarus in exchange for the fund's special drawing rights. After all, what these institutions do must be in line with the statutory documents of these organizations. But they aren't. The politicized approaches of the Western participants, including the attempts to include anti-Russia language in official documents, take the Bretton Woods institutions far beyond financial and economic mandates and paralyze their work. Key shareholders are increasingly aggressively pushing their fiscal, energy and climate policy agenda through the fund and the bank. Taking advantage of their position as donors, they impose priorities that the global majority countries find irrelevant. Discussions about the causes of the ongoing crises provoked by the irresponsible financial and economic policy of the West are diverted to a politicized realm in order to distort the reality and to hold Russia responsible for global economic upheavals, financial crises, etc. Moreover, at the behest of Western shareholders, the main flow of IMF and World Bank resources has been redirected since 2022 to support the Kiev regime, while the genuinely needy countries of the Global South are unable to receive the financial assistance they need. The fund and the bank are impassively watching these neo-colonial atrocities unfold. Their senior executives are, in fact, adjusting their activities to the U.S. domestic political situation. Without a doubt, these circumstances make a full-fledged reform of the international financial architecture and its key institutions unavoidable. The IMF and the bank's agendas should fully correspond to their financial and economic profile and the interests of global development. The governing bodies of the Bretton Woods organizations must be brought in line with the actual balance of power and interests in the global economy. The situation where the G7, which accounted for 30% of global GDP in 2023, is trying to dictate its financial and economic rules to the global majority is unacceptable. Even if they had 50 or 70% of global GDP, the terms of their own policy require respect for the will of the minority. In reality, things are the other way round. The West has literally torn up and destroyed democratic principles in international affairs. They mean nothing to it, mere words. The West is imposing its agenda, which is neither progressive nor effective, nor is it producing concrete results. In particular, the share of BRICS economies alone in global GDP now stands at 36%. There are more global majority countries out there. Why are the G7 countries behaving in such a rude manner in the Bretton Woods institutions? We operate on the premise that the international monetary system must be non-discriminatory, ensure equal access for everyone, and be fair. Those words must re-enter its lexicon. Above all, it is imperative to fully implement the agreements achieved by the G20 leaders in 2010 about redistributing votes in the IMF in favor of the developing countries. It is important to approve a procedure for recalculating quotas in the fund, no matter how hard the United States may try to obstruct it. The reason for them doing so is clear: they strive to maintain a controlling interest in the Bretton Woods institutions. Issues of improving the capabilities of international financial institutions in matters of promoting development should be highlighted as well. Expanding financial and lending activities should be in line with their core mission and ensure long-term stability and sustainability. For many years now, the Bretton Woods institutions have been touting the benefits of the US dollar, only to see the dollar destabilize the global financial architecture, including the dollar-based US economic policies. Key areas of spending should be regulated by all shareholders of these institutions. This should be laid down as the core rule. We consider it indispensable to consolidate the efforts of the global majority in the context of reforming the financial architecture and establishing a multipolar world based on international law and the principles of transparency, non-discrimination, and consideration of each other's interests rather than the rules, which are constantly changing, dictated by Westerners. We are promoting them in conjunction with our partners from BRICS, the SCO, the EAEU and other formats. We look forward to the Bretton Woods institutions, in their anniversary year, also remembering them and making them the centerpiece of their activities, considering that all of that is stipulated in the statutory documents. The 80th anniversary of the liberation of Vilnius from Nazi troops. On July 13, 1944, the capital of the Lithuanian SSR, Vilnius, was liberated from the Nazi invaders during the Vilnius offensive operation. The city had great strategic importance as an element of German defense in the Baltics and a fortified transport hub, which was guarded by a Nazi garrison of about 15,000 soldiers and officers with firepower of up to 270 guns and 40 tanks. According to the July 4, 1944 directive of the headquarters of the Supreme High Command on the development of the offensive on Vilnius, the task was set to deliver the main blow in the direction of Vilnius and capture the city no later than July 10 to 12. Ivan Chernyakhovsky, commander of the 3rd Byelorussian Front, one of the youngest Red Army generals at the age of 37, decided to attack the Lithuanian capital without an operational rest and ordered Lieutenant General Nikolai Krylov's 5th Army, Marshal of Armored Forces Pavel Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army, and Lieutenant General Viktor Obukhov's 3rd Guards Mechanist Corps to strike. Units of Soviet-Lithuanian partisans, united in the Vilnius and Trakai brigades, as well as separate units of the Home Army, also took part in the operation. On July 13, 1944, after fierce fighting and the suppression of hotbeds of Nazi resistance, the liberation of the Lithuanian capital was completed. Over 7,000 German soldiers and officers were killed, and over 5,000 prisoners, 156 guns, 28 tanks, 1,100 vehicles, and 153 warehouses with military equipment were captured in the battles for Vilnius. In order to prevent victims among civilians and preserve the historic buildings of Vilnius, the Soviet command decided to refrain from using aviation and heavy artillery on a large scale. At the request of the Lithuanian government, General Ivan Chernyakhovsky, who was killed in February 1945, was buried in the city that he liberated. In 1950, a monument showing the general full height and featuring an inscription to Army General Ivan Chernyakhovsky from the Lithuanian people in Lithuanian on the foundation was unveiled to honor him. However, in 1991, the authorities of the Free Lithuania, pressured by the nationalists who declared war on Soviet monuments, decided to liquidate the memorial as a piece of communist propaganda. The hero's ashes were taken to Moscow and reburied at the Novodevichy cemetery. The monument to Ivan Chernyakhovsky was also carefully transported to Russia and installed in Voronezh, on a square named after him, to commemorate what the famous Soviet commander did during the liberation of this Russian city in 1943. Recently, another memorial to Ivan Chernyakhovsky has been unveiled at the Aeroport metro station in Moscow with active assistance of Russian Minister of Culture Vladimir Medinsky. By the way, we wish him a happy birthday. I recommend everyone to visit it.